This is stuff you're not supposed to know. And this is part 2 of email questions answered by James Montgomery. Yes, Virginia, the Constitution was a fraud. Here goes. Marty, the information continues to pour in support of the information the informer and I have been writing about, and totally confirms the below comments of Sir Edmund Burke. Read the following quote, just one of many from his speech. Quote, "If America gives you taxable objects on which you lay your duties here, and gives you at the same time a surplus by a foreign sale of her commodities to pay the duties on these objects, which you tax at home, she has performed her part to the British revenue. But with regard to her own internal establishments, she may, I doubt not she will, contribute in moderation. I say in moderation, for she ought not to be permitted to exhaust herself. She ought to be reserved to a war, the weight of which, with the enemies that we are most likely to have, must be considerable in her quarter of the globe. There she may serve you, and serve you essentially." Unquote. There she may serve you, and serve you essentially. For that service, for all service, whether of revenue, trade, or empire, my trust is in her interest in the British Constitution. My hold of the colonies is in the close affection which grows from common names, from kindred blood, from similar privileges, and equal protection. These are ties which, though light as air, are as strong as links of iron. Let the colonists always keep the idea of their civil rights associated with your government. They will cling and grapple to you, and no force under heaven will be of power to tear them from their allegiance." Unquote. Burke, On Conciliation with the Colonies, March 22nd, 1775, pages 71 and 72, published by Allen and Bacon. Quote, "In May 1775, Washington said, 'If you ever hear of me joining in any such measure as separation from Great Britain, you have my leave to set me down for everything wicked.'" And apparently that can be found on Burke on Conciliation with the Colonies. And that's from March 22nd, 1775, pages 71, 72, published by Allen and Bacon. Following quote is from Ingersoll, North American Review, number 2, August 1892, page 183. It's also quoted in Sources of the Constitution by C. Ellis Stevens from 1927, page 36. Here is that quote. Quote, "In May 1775, George Washington said, 'If you ever hear of me joining in any such measure as separation from Great Britain, you have my leave to set me down for everything wicked.' He also said, 'It is not wish or interest of the government of Massachusetts or of any other upon this continent, separately or collectively, to set up for independence.'" Unquote. Marty, John Jay, one of the men to construct and sign the peace treaty of 1783, and the sole man responsible for the Jay Treaty of 1795, he made very clear by his statements that he did not want independence from England. And as Burke said above, you can believe you are free and still be subject to England. That is what Burke said, wasn't it? Let them think they're free. All we want is their money. The following quote is from 1995... Left Justified Publics. It doesn't say the book. Quote, "Jay did not favor independence from Britain. His absence from the signing of the Declaration of Independence was noted by Thomas Jefferson." Unquote. You know, Jefferson, for being such a smart guy, he seems one of the more clueless men of those elitists who adopted the Constitution. Weird. Marty, To prove what Sir Edmund Burke said is possible and was part of the plan of the king, you need to look at the 1213 Charter and the 1689 Declaration of Rights. Because of space limitations, I was not able to include them in this email, but will send them to you if you want them. I did include them in America is Still a British Colony, Part 3. The following is a section from my addendum from America is Still a British Colony, Part 3. Here is the addendum. I have just discovered the following two end notes. They completely confirm in a very final way my research in America is Still a British Colony, Parts 1 and 2 and 3, and the Informer's research and book, The New History of America. If you will study the following papers, the Magna Carta and our Bill of Rights, and come to an understanding of their similarities, then please reread the charters included in British Colony Parts 1 and 2, keeping in mind the issues I raised, and then read the following commentary. Quote, the two main issues as I see them in British Colony are, 1, the financial obligations of the 1213 Charter, EN number 1, entry number 1, I guess, are still in effect, along with the charters establishing America. 2. The last sentence of the 1689 Bill of Rights, entry number 2, proves the following. Unquote, and here's another quote starting. I'm not sure if this is the same. It looks like it's coming from something called Statute of 32. It says statute. I'm going to guess that's supposed to be statute. Statute of 32, Henry VIII, is from 1540. Is that right? Page 84. Okay. Here goes. Quote, that the charters of the colonies could never be overturned by a declaration of... Okay, obviously this did not come from Henry VIII in 1540. It's talking about the Declaration of Independence. All right. Needless to say, okay, these emails, this correspondence could have been organized better, but just ignore that. The information is very rare. Wherever this quote comes from, I'll read it. I don't know what it is. Quote, that the charters of the colonies could never be overturned by a Declaration of Independence or the 1787 Treaty, otherwise known as the Constitution. Okay, this is looking like it's from James Montgomery himself. Why does he have it in quotes? Doggone it. I'm talking about the real subject matter, financial obligation. Title for the land was transferred to the states and then ceded by charter to the federal government under Sestui K. Trust, but the contracted debt and obligation of the colonial charters and the 1213 Charter could not be negated. Rights could be granted to the citizens, subjects, or combatants, whichever the case may be, but the financial obligation cannot nor could not be affected, because it involves parties not yet born. This is why King William said, the 1689 Bill of Rights would not free the kingdom from the obligation of the 1213 Charter, where King John gave England to the Pope at that time in 1213. That's again why the 1215 Magna Carta is useless, that and the fact it was signed under duress. This is why the United States Bank was given right of charter in America. George Washington had no choice but to succumb to the... twist his arm behind his back, right? Washington had no choice but to succumb to the Rothschild's point man, Hamilton. Talk about déjà vu. I mean, does this not sound familiar? Our Bill of Rights was given to us to give us the illusion of freedom. When the tax obligation of the charters above marched along unimpeded and unseen by Americans and Britons alike. Read the Magna Carta again. They wanted the Pope's blessing for the 1215 Charter, This same Pope is the Pope in the 1213 Charter, where England and Ireland were given to him. He could not just give back his land because of other parties not yet born. You think the elitists are that stupid? They're going to create laws to prevent one of their own, who might be weaker than the usual, one of their own from giving the whole farm away. So they've created laws like the Law of Mortmain, which you probably will discuss here somewhere, which makes it impossible for the Pope or the King to give away anything that's supposed to be ceded to his children. What do you think they would do? Come on. That's their built-in security clause. Of course they're going to protect themselves. He couldn't give back his land because of parties not yet born. The Pope let the barons presume they were free, and even gave his blessing to the 1215 Magna Carta, knowing to do so would in no way lawfully overturn the grant made to him in the 1213 Charter. Also, it is apparent, it was recognized as law that you could not even create a charter wherein you declared a previous grant or charter null in void unless the relevant parties both agreed. All agreed. How can a charter be made void if parties to the charter will never cease to be born? An heir can always be found. To prove this, again, what did the new King William do? Even though the previous monarchy had come to an end, its obligations, though, did not. This is why he had to include paragraph 3, a clause to protect the other parties of an earlier charter. Unquote. Marty, to prove our point, read the following previous email I sent out so as not to replicate work. All right, and I think this is James Montgomery's writing again. You will have to read the below statute many times to understand what the king is saying. It was obviously made to be vague and ambiguous. It contains 2 sentences. The first is 658 words long. The second is 166 words long, not counting punctuation. I have included the following commentary to help your understanding of the below statute. The king is saying that some of the representatives, I think this might be talking about Statute of 32 by Henry VIII, 1540, I don't know. The king is also saying that some of the representatives of the Catholic Church and some of his subjects have received grants of land from the king. The king is also saying they are in violation of certain provisions contained in the grants and land patents. Portions of these grants and land patents were granted to third-party entities by his first-party grantees through the king's grants and charters, having been granted to them. Because of contractual provisions contained in the grants and land patents being violated, the land was declared to revert back to the original grantees who received grants from the king. As stated in Section 1, this statute deals with land twice removed from the king. To preserve the clarity of his grants and land patents, in conjunction with the law of mortmain. There it is, the law of mortmain. You will see that the first-party grantors included ecclesiastical and religious persons, as well as secular. This statute does not change grants between the king and the first-party grantees and land patentees. Number 7, Section 1 should make you think. If any tax or rent due, as declared in Number 5, Section 1, under the king's grants or charters, are not paid, the land reverts back to the king, as if the grants and charters were never written. This is the same language of intent used in the 1689 Declaration of Rights, 3rd section, and the 25th section, in also the 1776 North Carolina Bill of Rights, of the North Carolina 1776 Constitution, which established the North Carolina Corporation. Just like every other state is a corporation. Just like the federal government is a corporation. Deal with it, Collins Brothers. In Section 2, the King extends this statute to all grants made by him now or in the future. The key and purpose to this statute is contained in Number 2, Section 1. No stranger is to enjoy a benefit of any grant or charter, if they are not a grantee and benefactor, without paying a rent or tax. See Number 5, Section 1. The main target of this statute was the Catholic Church. Okay, so he must be talking about Statute of 32 by Henry VIII, 1540. All right. The main target of this statute was the Catholic Church, because they were not paying the tax due under the grants made to them. However, as shown in previous emails, the Vatican owned the land they were being taxed for under the 1213 Charter when King John at the time gave England and Ireland to the Pope at that time. I am sure this is why the Vatican refused to pay the tax, because the owner of the land does not tax himself. Since the states were the benefactors of the 1783 peace treaty, not the inhabitants, and they later transferred their original grant from the king to the United States Constitution / corporation, making the inhabitants of the states strangers. Maybe now you know how and why you are taxed. And when the tax is not paid, the land reverts back to the benefactor of the king's original land grants, the United States Corporation, the trustee administering the trust / constitution / charter. Nothing has changed since the days of William the Conqueror, where taxes were levied based on the record of the land holdings written down in his Doomsday Book, used by the Exchequer to tax the benefactors of the king's grants. Today, the same procedure is followed, continued under the charters which created this country, this corporation. The king established the rent roll tax in the states based on the county's record of all titles, which are now used by the Exchequer / Federal Reserve to tax the stranger, levy, or foreclose on the riot tenure, as defined in Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. A system of land tenure where the government takes the place of landowners and collects the rent by means of tax gatherers. The farming is done by poor peasants, or ryots, who find the capital so far as there is any, and also do the work. The system exists in Turkey, Egypt. That puts us in really good company, huh? The system exists in Turkey, Egypt, Persia, and other eastern countries, and in a modified form in British India. After slavery, it is accounted the worst of all systems. And this is what we have. And people think we're free. Oh, Lord, help us. It is accounted after slavery the worst of all systems because the government can fix the rent at whatever it pleases. And it is difficult to distinguish between rent and taxes. And that's a quote from Black's Law Dictionary, I think. That might be Montgomery's words. However, he's getting the information from, again, Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. Read 'em and weep, folks. Read 'em and weep. I want to inject a big however. And here it is. The King and the Vatican are both in violation of the law. They do not have ownership of the land or have perfected land title, no matter what their charters and land patents say. And why is that? Why do you think that would be? Who is the original grantor of land? God Almighty. Not the king or the pope. Their claim to the land, to the detriment of the righteous, their claim will be revoked. Who did God Almighty entrust the land to? The church, i.e. government, the Christians, trustees of Christ's kingdom. Are not the riches of the world stored up for the righteous? Do not the kingdoms of the world become the kingdom of Christ upon His return? I tell you what, I'm liking the sound of this, folks. I've been on the brink of poor all my life, and this is music to my ears right now. I can afford a pot to urinate in and a few other things, and I drive a car that's always on the verge of and it's something I've struggled with all my life, and I passed right over this in the Bible. The riches of the world stored up for the righteous, the kingdoms of the world become the kingdom of Christ on His return. Hallelujah. Oh, Lord Jesus, I long for that time when I won't have to slave through a daily grind just to barely get by. I'm so tired of that, and getting up so damn early every morning just to barely get by. Thank you, Lord. Boy, I long for that time. And I long for a time when the Lord will give me something interesting to do also, and will leave me alone and allow me the creativity which He has blessed me with in order to fulfill whatever that is. God, I long for that time. Oh, man. Folks, if you don't think this world sucks, pull your head out. Pull your head out. Or, that means you are very wealthy and you need to get rid of most of your stuff and go try to jump through the eye of a needle and abandon your wealth and your yeah, this is affecting me. I just found out yesterday, when you go bankrupt, which we have to do, that the bludgeoners, the tax collectors still come around and tax you on everything that you've gone bankrupt on. So there really is no bankrupt. You still have to pay a percentage that I won't be able to pay for many years. That we won't be able to pay for many years. They consider it income. It's income, right? All this stuff that we couldn't pay and had to escape from the usurers. I'm going off on a tangent now, but I just learned that yesterday because, hey, you know what? I've never gone bankrupt before. I've always slaved my tail end off just to make ends meet, and I've always paid my bills, paid everything my whole life up to this point, and finally the usurious system caught me. It caught me. It threw a frickin' left hook at me from out of left field and caught me and knocked me on my ass. and I'm tired of serving this slavish, bullshit, usurious, feudal system. But I can't get out until Jesus Christ comes back. Come, Jesus, come. Please forgive me for my sins. I am a wretched sinner. And I hope I have just an ounce of faith. But I'm sick of this. Sick of this present system. And somebody like James Montgomery spends many years researching it and proving it, and nobody will listen to him because they let their emotions govern themselves and won't deal with facts. And I am reading to you facts. Enough. Lose the anger. Lose the anger, bro. All right. So, getting back to James Montgomery. So, who are the true benefactors of the one and only lawful land grant? Why, the servants of Jesus Christ. I suppose that means that's when the meek inherit the earth. I asked the informer to run this statute on Writer to see how it would grade the reading level of this statute from 1540. It has a reading grade level of a 17th grade level, and that is as high as the program goes. Wow. All right, so he includes the Statute of 32, Henry VIII, I guess it's during his reign, C. period 84, 1540. And there are two sentences here, and it takes up half the page. And folks, the font is a very small font that I've printed up. This is outrageous. I obviously am not going to read this to you, but this is what lawyers do. They're hiding the keys of knowledge. 1540, they were doing it. Well, why not? They were doing it during Jesus' time. And that is why Jesus wished woe upon them. That's part of it. So I will skip over this Statute of 32 from Henry VIII's time, Henry VIII, C-84, 1540. Holy smokes, that's two sentences. Actually, it's taking up 2/3 of the page, folks, and the font is very small. I printed it up on the smallest size font I could read with any facility. This would take up an entire page if it was 12-point font, easily, more than a page, and it's 2 sentences. This is what lawyers do to you. It's what they've already done. They've already done it. All right, skipping on to the close of this email by James Montgomery. Marty, you are right. The 14th Amendment is very relevant, but I think misunderstood on just what its implications are. If you will read my America is a British Colony, still, Part 3, I include forgotten history that shows just how relevant the 14th Amendment argument is. However, after you learn this information, if you do not already know it, you will come to the conclusion the informer and I have come to. No reoccurring remedy will be obtained in the courts. Just brief aberrations of justice. Based, you mean like Joe Bannister? Based on the demeanor or impatience of the judge, or his or her lack of self-confidence, based on the judge's lack of knowledge concerning, you guessed it, public policy, the ever-shifting sands of public policy. Once the judges know their decisions will not be overturned, or their careers damaged, defeat of the standard patriot arguments will be swift, and the penalty for frivolous lawsuits will be just as swift and increase with intolerance of the judiciary. And isn't that what we've seen since the mid to late 90s when James Montgomery wrote this? I don't mean to sound like a stick in the mud, but it is true. Only through the education of the public, good luck with that one, coinciding with the coming financial pain, oh yeah, will change the public's perception of their freedom. Unfortunately, I fear it will be too late to make any changes until Rome self-destructs. Signed, James Montgomery. Here's another email response from James Montgomery. Ken, I thought I would send you this email in case you also are sent the original message, like the one you just sent me, from Eagle Flight. You will see a quote below from Burke. I thought I would add a few more quotes that were not in the original message from Burke. I can make you a copy of Burke's speech if you are interested. It is 87 pages in total. Wow. There are many more pearls contained in his speech. I am in the process of typing up several pages of quotes. The setting for his speech was just before the 1776 war. He was arguing against the use of force. The majority of the House of Commons wanted to beat the colonies into submission. I just tonight obtained a copy of the complete work of Adam Smith. Al and I each have different books containing portions of his complete work. His complete work is 800 pages. We can hook up on the modem, and I could send it to you. As you will see below from the additional quotes, if you are not yet convinced of what I have been saying, that it is true on this subject, you will be. Also, if you have ever wondered where the American taxing system came from, there will be no doubt after you read the below quotes from Adam Smith. The below quotes are only a portion of what I marked in skimming his book tonight. He obviously goes into more detail in his 800-page book. And this quote from Sir Edmund Burke before the House of Commons, March 22nd, 1775. But my idea of it is this, that an empire is the aggregate of many states under one common head, whether this head be a monarch or a presiding republic. That's a pretty telling quote. What was it Franklin said when asked, "What government have you given us?" In reply, he said, "A republic." And you guys probably know the rest of the quote, right? Our forefathers were protecting their assets, Montgomery writes, and seeking to remain subject to the king in a hidden way, for which they were to receive further privileges. I would love to be able to look into the old English records and see if their personal land holdings in England increased after the 1783 peace treaty and the 1787 Constitution/Charter were approved by an unsuspecting public. Here is another quote from Edmund Burke, a series of quotes here, 3 of them. Quote, "Men may lose little in property by the act which takes away all their freedom. When a man is robbed of a trifle on the highway, it is not the 2 pence lost that constitutes the capital outrage." Another quote. These are all from 1775, a speech by Edmund Burke before the House of Commons. Quote, "The people heard, indeed, from the beginning of these disputes, one thing continually dinned in their ears, that reason and justice demanded that the Americans, who paid no taxes, should be compelled to contribute." Unquote. Quote, "Let us get an American revenue, as we have got an American empire. English privileges have made it all that it is. English privileges alone will make it all that it can be." Unquote. This is a quote from Adam Smith, 1776, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. Quote, "Their wealth was considered our wealth. Whatever money was sent out to them, it was said, came all back to us by the balance of trade, and we could never become a farthing the poorer by any expense which we could lay out upon them. They were our own in every respect, and it was an expense laid out upon the improvement of our property, and for the profitable employment of our own people." Unquote. James Montgomery. Need I say more? I have been ridiculed by some for what I have said in respect to our continued subjection to England, and I am sure Al has too. The above quote is further evidence that the king did not relinquish his charter/contract and land grants/patents to the United States. Instead, he preserved his ability to receive gain through his taxes for his investments. The below quotes will make you realize that the present tax system was put in place by the king and is completely British. And the way they chose to continue to receive the king's profit from his investment, as declared in his charters. The Federal Reserve was also placed here by the Crown, which is proven in the congressional record, included in this message, and what was included in the banking paper I did. It is so clear, I could even prove it to the average American, given the time, money, and opportunity to present it. All right, there is a long quote here. I'm not going to read this. It is in, 2 pages. A very long excerpt from an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. I've read this once before. I did not highlight any of it. I didn't think any of it really jumped out to me on the first reading. I'm going to skip this quote. Okay. Continuing. Montgomery writes, Robert, you need to read what Washington declared again. I did not declare it. I did not write it, so I do not have anything backwards. First of all, the judicial district you are referring to was created. The judicial districts were created by the Judiciary Act of 1789, 2 years before Washington said Congress gave him additional powers. Thereby, he, Washington, created the district states, so the federal government could use the militias to crush the tax protesters in Pennsylvania by Washington's order. Since the judicial districts already existed, why did they, as you suggest, recreate them? If the district states were already created, as you suggest, would it not be redundant to create them again? Washington said he was dividing the United States into district states. He said, dividing the states. Listen again. Dividing the states. Not creating districts in the states. Dividing the states into districts. Changing them. Or you would not have divided them, because the states were already divided. How can you divide or separate the states made by the state and federal charters/constitutions? Why do this when Congress already had the power to put down a rebellion? Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. This was merely an excuse to divide the states into districts, extending the jurisdiction of the District of Columbia/Congress and delegating to the President authority given to Congress to suppress insurrection under Article 1, Section 8. And you know what? When I read a thing like that about George Washington, folks, and this is me talking now, you remember, maybe you've heard this in history classes or in a Hitler Channel documentary about George Washington. It has been said that Napoleon Bonaparte was envious of Washington's humility, the story goes, because Napoleon, he looked upon Washington as a man who could have been crowned but spurned that crown. And Napoleon, in a way, envied Washington's ability to be so humble. And Napoleon himself obviously lacked that humility. But, folks, that's baloney. Washington might as well have crowned himself Washington got all the power of the crown temporarily, and then he went home to retire and live out a posh life on his estate. Washington, when he divided the states, he basically did what a Napoleon would have done. Became a megalomaniac instantly and crushed a rebellion using executive orders, purely concocted executive orders, making himself a dictator until the next dictator could be elected, and the next one, and the next one. So, was Washington really much better than Napoleon? Was he any better? Maybe a little. Didn't kill as many people, right? Second, the use of any military power before Congress declares war, by direction of the President, is done by him as Commander-in-Chief. Until Congress declares war, they cannot stop the President unless they impeach him. Or when they declare war, they can stop the President with the power of the purse, unless the President were to then declare a national emergency as Commander-in-Chief, overriding Congress, in effect declaring himself king. Or in our case, anyone holding that office, which we now have. I disagree with the unconstitutional emergency powers claimed by the President, but unless the judiciary declares the President out of line, you or I cannot change this unless you or I were elected President and declared the power unconstitutional. But Congress would then impeach you or I to protect, you guessed it, public policy. Around and around it goes. Again, this power comes from their operating under executive jurisdiction, insular capacity. See Downs versus Bidwell, 182 U.S. 244 from the year 1901, which was allowed by the judiciary, beginning with what Washington did. Because it was up to the judiciary to declare what Congress was doing was unconstitutional, and up to Washington to not take power delegated to Congress. This power was affirmed by the Congressional Act of 1845, and in the 1850s by the Insular Cases. This set the stage for Lincoln to begin the executive orders, and here we are. Third, the districts Washington created answered directly to the Commander-in-Chief, not Congress. In order for these districts to be created by the President, Congress had to give the President power outside of the Constitution, as declared by Washington himself. Martial law can be used as soon as the military is called upon to put down insurrection or fight a war. Washington created district states, not state districts, and the military occupied the Pennsylvania district until the insurgents went home. Washington said these districts were created for putting down the rebellion. However, they were never disbanded when the rebellion ended. The fact that you can't see something, with all due respect, does not change reality. Below, you will see how Lincoln codified the war powers. You can download the whole General Order 100, or ask me and I will email it to you, along with the court cases and definitions on the same subject. All right, there's some excerpts here about military law, military jurisdiction, military necessity. It's some legalese quoted here in my first reading of this. Nothing jumped out at me, so I'm going to skip forward. Who's writing this one? I think it's Montgomery's writing. Because of the power of the Pope to raise armies, the king, this is talking about King John of England in 1213, who signed England and Ireland away to the Pope at that time. Because of the power of the Pope to raise armies, the king had to do anything he could to regain the blessing of the church via the Pope. So in 1213, by way of charter/trust, the king gave all of his holding to the Pope, including England and Ireland, all that he possessed, and placed his subjects forever under the dictates of the Pope. You can find a copy of this charter in the In a Nutshell paper I just sent to you. So now you know what the king did and why. Now you have to ask yourself, is the 1213 charter still valid today? I obviously don't have receipts from the gold and silver taxes paid to the Pope, but there are ways to know the answer. First, in 1689, there was a Declaration of Rights that took place after the Civil War in England. Charles I was beheaded, and Charles II was overthrown. But what took place was even more drastic than a change in monarchy. Theology and doctrine were turned on its head. King William declared that England and his subjects were no longer under the Pope or the Catholic Church. Even today you can see this division in Ireland with the IRA, who remain loyal to the Pope, and Unionists that remain loyal to the King and the Protestant doctrine, stemming back to King William. The Declaration went on to declare many rights for the subjects of King William. Did the 1689 Declaration of Rights, with the blessing of King William, void the 1213 Charter, though? 3. Provided that no charter or grant or pardon granted before the 23rd day of October in the year of our Lord 1689, so this is the Declaration of Rights of 1689, shall be anyways impeached or invalidated by this act, but that the same shall be and remain of the same force and effect in law as no other than as if the act had never been made. So no, right there in the 1689 Declaration of Rights, it does not void the 1213 Charter, and it says so right there. Back to Montgomery. King William's lawyers said in this section that if any charter or grant prior to this 1689 Declaration of Rights is contradicted by this declaration, as a matter of law, the declaration is as if it were never written. There are several truths to be taken from this. The obvious one is the 1213 Charter could not be invalidated because it is a non-revocable trust, a contract. Only the parties to the contract can void a trust. Parties to the trust continue to be born every day. Also, the freedom imagined by the subjects was just that. It was imagined. Remember the quotes from Sir Edmund Burke that I included in the previous email? Well, here is another one. Quote, "If America gives you taxable objects on which you lay your duties here, and gives you at the same time a surplus by a foreign sale of her commodities to pay the duties on these objects which you tax at home, she has performed her part to the British revenue. But with regard to her own internal establishments, she may, I doubt not she will, contribute in moderation. I say in moderation, for she ought not to be permitted to exhaust herself. She ought to be reserved to a war, the weight of which, with the enemies that we are most likely to have, must be considerable in her quarter of the globe. There she may serve you, and serve you essentially. For that service, for all service, whether of revenue, trade, or empire, my trust is in her interest in the British Constitution. My hold of the colonies is in the close affection which grows from common names, from common blood, from common similar privileges, and equal protection. These are ties which, though light as air, are as strong as links of iron. Let the colonists always keep the idea of their civil rights associated with your government. They will cling and grapple to you, and no force under heaven will be of power to tear them from their allegiance." Unquote. That was Burke on Conciliation with the Colonies, March 22nd, 1775. Pages 71 and 72, published by Allen and Bacon. Back to the words of James Montgomery. As I said, King William made it clear that he did not have the power or legal authority to void the 1213 Charter with the Pope or any other charter that came into conflict with the 1689 Declaration of Rights. Now, this is one witness to what I have said in America is Still a British Colony, parts 1, 2, and 3. So, as of 1689, the 1213 Charter was still law. It is still law today, and here is another witness I just got last night. This is from Sir William Anson, The Law and Custom of the Constitution, 5th edition, Oxford, 1922. Quote, "The Bill of Rights of 1689, which is still in force as statute law and remains our central constitutional document, the Bill of Rights is the nearest approach to a constitutional code which we possess." Unquote. Next quote, "The Bill of Rights by Richard Munday in Bowles versus Bank of England." Quote, "The Bill of Rights still remains unrepealed, and no practice or custom, however prolonged, or however acquiesced in on the part of the subject, can be relied on by the Crown as justifying any infringement of its provisions." Unquote. And to bring this fact to the present, says James Montgomery, this is a quote from A. Lester, A British Bill of Rights, 2nd edition, Institute for Public Policy Research, 1996. Quote, "It is ironical, but perhaps unsurprising, that recent years have seen calls for a new Bill of Rights." Unquote. And let's finish up with the words of Montgomery. So, to answer your question, yes, Britain is still subject to Rome, unknown to the Brits. Is it possible for such an important fact to remain hidden? The facts say yes. Also, as the Brits recognize the 1689 Declaration of Rights to still be the law in Britain, and their constitution, we are faced with the same thing in this country. Do not Americans believe themselves to be totally free and claim the Bill of Rights in our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which they will all claim is modeled after the 1215 Magna Carta? Did not Sir Edmund Burke say in the quote above, "Let the colonists always keep the idea of their civil rights associated with your government. They will cling and grapple to you, and no force under heaven will be of power to tear them from their allegiance"? We are a colony yet today, be it unknown, but the lack of knowledge does not change the facts. Just because the world was believed to be flat in the Middle Ages did not make it flat. A portion of the taxes paid today go by treaty to Great Britain. Our tax system was given to us by England. Our Federal Reserve was given to us by the Bank of England. The bankruptcy of England in the 1700s and their debt was taken over by the Rothschilds, who controlled the Bank of England. If you want to learn more about this issue, I will send you A Country Defeated in Victory, parts 1 and 2, and read the attached congressional record. Where did the Rothschilds get their money? Seemingly overnight, and enough of it to finance war and government around the world, including the United States. The Vatican? The Vatican, via the Pope, is the only source of such immense wealth. The Pope regained land given him in the Charter of 1213 through debt and taxes and supplying financial assistance at the right time. How did the king regain his land in America as declared in his charters? Debt taxes and supplying financial assistance at the right time. I wonder where he learned this practice from. Signed, James Montgomery. And that will conclude this installment number 2 of Email Questions Answered by James Montgomery. Yes, the Constitution is dead. And this has been, it never was it ever, this has been the aptly named Stuff You're Not Supposed to Know, folks. Goodbye.